Great to be with you this afternoon. It is 4:35. Shay here on BBC Radio London. It's time for Year in Review. And today I really wanted to shine a light on the world of technology. Throughout the year, the brilliant James Erskine, who is the CEO of Rocket, he's our resident technology and social media expert, has been joining me on a monthly basis, giving us the latest when it comes to the world of technology news. So as we're coming up to the end of the year, I felt it was important for Year in Review we really homed in on this particular area, technology and social media. And James joins me now. Hello, James.
Hello, Shay. Nice to be with you.
It's so great to have you back for Year in Review today. But I think as I was looking at your stories, I was a little bit concerned because there's been so many stories. How did you manage to whittle it all down?
I kind of took the approach slightly arrogantly and looked at three things that I sort of did say might happen.
Yes.
That have happened.
Okay.
And then looked at three predictions that might happen next year or in the next few years.
Yes.
And what I've kind of done with the three predictions are, in truth, it's stuff I said would happen already but hasn't quite happened yet.
Okay.
So I have cheated.
Yeah, but absolutely fine.
Yes.
2024, one of my guests on Monday, Jesse, who was talking about for Year in Review, he felt that this year was the year of AI.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that, firstly, as a comment?
Well, it's interesting because I suppose it has been.
Yeah.
But what you have to do is think about how it has changed our lives as individuals.
Okay.
So what I would contest is that AI, when you're booking something, when you're doing something, hasn't massively changed the way that we operate as individuals,
right,
as far as we, the consumers, know.
Okay.
From a business perspective, it's changed processes, it's changed the way people work. So I suppose from a business perspective, it has changed the way that we exist.
Yeah.
But from an end user perspective, I suppose it hasn't. Now, the one big thing, forgive me mentioning a search engine, but everybody knows Google. Mm-hmm. One thing that has changed is Google. Because at the start of the year, when you typed something into Google, it gave you a load of links where to find the answer to your question.
It did, yes.
Now, it gives you the answer to the question in the search results. And what that is the start of is it's the start of Google or other search engines containing that web traffic. Okay. And that has huge implications for news providers, for example, because if you can get the answer straight away on the homepage, why would you bother clicking through to go elsewhere?
I see.
And we're finding that more and more in the way that we interact with online media.
But what is the benefit for Google to be doing that?
Because they track the traffic. So what they are doing is keeping it within their ecosystem, within their own pages, as opposed to letting you go somewhere else and somebody else spending the ad impressions. You've also seen, and this is kind of a bigger theme, but you've almost seen news be adversely affected by the way that social media and digital media are operating. Mm-hmm. So Instagram and Facebook deprioritized news about 2 years ago. The remaining news-focused social network is Twitter, now known as X.
Yes.
And that's had its own problems. So there's less places to go on social media for news. What's also interesting is how young people are consuming news.
Right.
Because they still see brands like the BBC, but they're not consuming them on the BBC's own real estate. They're not listening to BBC Radio. They're not watching BBC television. Mm-hmm. But what they are doing is looking for the BBC trusted brand on TikTok, on Snapchat, in other places.
In Instagram, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, on their platform. So for you this year, it's one of the three things that has happened is social media has become like the gateway to the internet in that sense, or the gateway to news and the gateway to searching?
To everything. So whereas before you would go to a search engine, particularly the younger demographics are going straight to their platform of choice. And let's not be churlish, that's TikTok or Snapchat or maybe Instagram. And they're using those platforms how we, older people, would use a search engine.
Right.
So they're going straight to TikTok to say how to make a carbonara. They're going straight to TikTok, tell me about the political situation in Turkey. And that presents an opportunity because it means social media is the new search. And that's been a big moment of this year. But what that also means is, unless you have trusted people on those social platforms, it means they can be served disinformation or opinionated information.
Sure.
It's also become the gateway, exactly as you say, to news. It's also become the gateway to everything where you're starting a journey. You may have started a journey on a website, on a brand's website, on a news website, whereas now more and more traffic is going straight to social media.
I mean, that's kind of the point as well as to why we do see BBC News, BBC One, BBC Sounds, and of course BBC London on all of the social media platforms.
Completely.
Verified and trusted.
Completely. And you look at other brands, there's The Economist famously ran a test recently on Snapchat last year. And it was huge. It was very, very popular. Now, it's not The Economist that you would see in the print magazine or even on the website.
Right.
But it's different content produced by an authoritative voice in a digestible form on Snapchat. So it's interesting that other brands are looking at other ways to communicate. One of the pieces of research that I had was social media overtakes search engines for discovery among Gen Z and millennials. So social media is seen as the gateway to all things online.
It's becoming the way of the world, not just for younger people, though, isn't it? Because as you rightfully say, many of us will now, no matter what your age, still be looking at the trusted platforms. I mean, for example, just a quick search on Instagram, BBC News has 28 million followers. And not only does it obviously share news stories, what I do find really striking, we've seen a lot of different job titles coming up in recent years, one of them which you'll see what they are calling, hold on, I'm just trying to get her name so I can actually read it to you. A lot of these journalists, they are absolute journalists, but they will be video journalists on social media pages. So working for BBC, but video journalists.
Completely.
Because of the fact that people will go to these social media platforms.
That's right. And there's whole departments now. I mean, Shay, one of the few things I do in terms of giving back is I go and talk to people in schools.
Yes.
About jobs that might not exist at the moment that will in the future.
I see.
And social media journalism, data journalism, making statistics look more engaging for social platforms. Those were jobs that didn't really exist 10 or 15 years ago, but are now often the front-facing part of any news organisation.
So let's move to the second part then of what you feel 2024 has really seen happen, and that's social media becoming more and more heavily regulated.
So sometimes social media platforms are behind the curve when it comes to how users perceive them.
Okay.
So, for example, when you think about a social network like MySpace that was huge, and then it was bought by a news group or in the States, and because they weren't aware of the job it was doing, they removed the music focus, it failed, and they sold it on.
Right.
Similar, Friends Reunited, it was outmoded. What social media platforms haven't kept up with is the thought of regulation. And in Australia, we saw it be an incredibly popular move to ban social media for under 16s. Now, last month when I was here, we were talking, what does that actually mean? How do you define social media? Because every platform has an element of social to it. You could argue WhatsApp's a social platform. That's not been banned. You could argue YouTube's a social platform. That's not been banned. They're broadly talking about Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok.
Okay.
Those are the big three. And it's been banned, and there's been incredible kind of emotional rhetoric from the Australian Prime Minister Albanese saying, I want to return our children to the football fields and to the netball fields. And in the UK, the Online Safety Act starts being enforced in January of next year.
Okay.
Now, it's regulation, and the social platforms can be fined up to 10% of their earnings. So that's a huge amount of money.
Substantial.
Indeed. But what you've got to look at is how can they be regulated? And it was really interesting. Instagram brought in teen accounts this year.
That's right.
And that's their first concession to saying teenagers need to be dealt with in a different way to other people using that social platform. So teen accounts allow parents to not see the messages, but see who teens have been messaging. So it's interesting that we're starting to see a concession from online and particularly social media operators around how young people are engaging with those platforms.
And obviously we've seen in recent months, we've been talking about this, a lot of London schools taking part in schemes where they are either firstly banning phones altogether, or especially in primary or secondary schools, the uptake around head teachers, actually educational professionals as a whole, saying that smartphones are so detrimental, they should just not be in schools at all. It's risen extensively this year.
Hugely. I've spoken before about being a not very good dad.
I don't believe that, but I know what you mean around the world of social media.
And smartphones particularly. My son is 12. He has a smartphone. He's had a smartphone since he's got his own way to school, and he's been doing that since he was 11.
Okay.
So he does not need a smartphone. And I genuinely think, speaking with other parents, looking at the way now, in a few years' time, we will look at the way that teenagers, particularly young teenagers, engaged with social media as ridiculous. I think we'll look back on this era as a stupid era of what were they thinking. And the trouble is when they say they, it will mean me.
It's interesting that, because, I mean, my daughter Tyra, only last week we were talking about Christmas and Santa's Christmas list, and just out of the blue I was so stunned. In my head I still keep thinking that, you know, there's particular teddies that she wants, or I don't know, a toy from Inside Out or Moana. That's all in my head. And she just looked up at me, she goes, "Oh mummy, I would really like to have my own phone." And it just threw me. I literally could have fallen off my seat. I thought, sorry, how old are you?
I know.
And that with the caveat that when she started year 2, I remember many parents and I were speaking at the school gates at the fact that we all had to get tablets.
Yes.
Because of their online assessments and homework. Everything is done on a tablet.
Yeah, that's really true.
Or if you can, a laptop. I thought a laptop was a bit too much for a 7-year-old, but as you know, a tablet or an iPad, whatever you use, and many parents have had to use that. So the technology is already in their hands.
You're so right. And the technology is in their hands, whether it's for homework.
Yes.
And you also say, well, what about child apps like Roblox? So that's a children's game.
Don't get me started on
Roblox, there is a huge social element to Roblox. They can chat. Now, Roblox would argue, quite rightly, you can block anybody. You have to befriend them first so you could know them.
And you can manage that as a parent, or you should.
Yes, well, exactly. But our children are aware of how social media works. I shouldn't say this. I'm a 46-year-old man, but I work in youth marketing. I can't work Snapchat. My son can easily. It goes to the same when you see very young babies.
I'm like that with TikTok, to be honest.
There you go. When you see very young babies go to the TV and think it's a touch screen, they're more technologically aware and advanced than we are.
They are.
So it's tough, but regulation, I think, is naturally an obvious place for us to look next in terms of online.
With that final point then, as we talk about 2024 with our year in review and what the 3 things that we saw happen, the final aspect, also vitally important, social media seeing this real backlash with people recognising the dangers, but also recognising the weaknesses.
I think that's really true this year. I think whether you look at the race riots, where disinformation, and the Home Secretary came out and said the disinformation that was spread on social media was a huge factor in causing those riots across the country. Whether you look at simple things like not knowing what the truth is. I'll give you a prime example. There's stuff going around on TikTok about, and it's all AI generated, about a Friends movie where they all go to Chandler's funeral.
Okay.
And I showed my kids this. They've seen Friends. They quite like it. It works as family viewing. And they were so excited.
Right.
And I had to tell them, you need to check your sources. This is all a fabrication.
Oh my goodness
It's not
me.
real.
Yeah.
Now that's a really harmless example of something that looks very polished. It looked like a movie trailer, but it's a really good example of stuff not being real that's online.
Yeah.
And in that respect, one thing that we haven't seen, particularly this year has seen more elections than pretty much any other year globally. And we've not seen much stuff that has been AI generated that has hampered elections. There's not been any spoof quotes or pretend things online that of any artifice. But there is disinformation and misinformation. There's a story this week about a leading podcaster who hasn't been challenging his guests based on health claims. He's not done anything wrong, but he's not holding it up to the same standards. And I do think people are seeing social media as, can it be trusted?
Well, that's obviously very interesting in the fact that over 18 months ago, the BBC launched a whole new team with BBC Verify to do exactly that.
Yeah.
Verify
exactly
all of this information. Experts in disinformation, fact checking, fact finding, and getting to the bottom of, as you say, us mere mortals cannot do, to recognise if a story is fake or if it is not. Whilst I've got you've got 3 predictions for 2025. Stay with me because I would like to go down that rabbit hole with you, because what you've predicted thus far, James, has come to pass. I'll continue having a chat with our technology and social media expert, James Erskine, straight after Darling Love.